and welcome to another episode of Uni Eng Talk, a co-production by me, Faiza Ashraf, and the researcher Eleni Hadjigeorgiou. Um, this podcast is funded by the Newcastle University Stage Participatory Research Fund, inspired and scientifically supported by the Peer Networks for Engineers project.
Hi, I am Eleni and I'm an applied social scientist with experience working with disadvantaged communities using participatory action research and entrepreneurial methods to co-produce knowledge and in this way empower them to take the lead role in their own context. We're here because even though the university aspires to be a welcoming and inclusive place for all students, we know that it doesn't always feel like this, especially for students from minoritized or underrepresented groups like ethnic minorities, LGBTQIA, people of color, and in the engineering context, also women. In our research, we first explored through a really systematic reviews what peer networks have been implemented to increase inclusion in engineering undergraduate students, and specifically the barriers and facilitators of these peer networks to increase sense of belonging. We quickly noticed that there are no studies carried out for peer networks in engineering undergraduate students in the UK context, and therefore we felt the need to carry out a digital auto-ethnography using a digital platform called Indimo to capture the voices of inclusion and exclusion from the minoritized groups in Newcastle University. The identified peer networks from the really systematic review were given to the engineering school students to choose and prioritize three that they deem more beneficial to them. The mechanisms of inclusion and exclusion and the barriers and facilitators of the identified peer networks that they were chosen by the students to implement in Newcastle University were discussed in a World Cafe setting where we gathered all together to formulate the change we wanted to see through each of these interventions. And the research does not end there. It is now passed on to the hands of the very capable students. And through this podcast, they're going to further explore the feelings of belonging as well as disseminate the findings of this project and also carry out their chosen peer networks. All the best.
So in our Indemo that we'd done previously as a project, we found that 27% of underrepresented engineering students who participated in our project self-reported having a disability or neurodiversity. And that is 2.5 more students reporting a challenge than the average student would in School of Engineering. And so in this episode, we're going to talk about neurodiversity, things that people have experienced, and of course, what can be done to help them. And today's guest is Asya Khan. Am I pronouncing that right? Sorry.
You are?
Yep,
Yes.
perfect. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what kind of has led you to being involved in neurodiversity.
Okay, well, thanks, Faiza. So, well, my name is Asya, and I'm here, Associate Professor in Multimedia Communications and Intelligent Control here at the University of Plymouth. By profession, I'm an electrical electronic engineer, and I worked in industry for a number of years before I sort of came back to academia. In my sort of academic career, I have had the opportunity to be the EDI lead for my school, and that kind of I worked with, I developed, or I submitted the first Athena Swan application where we got the bronze award for the school. And that opened my eyes to the challenges that female students are still experiencing in our university, because when I studied, that is like over 20 to 25 years ago, the percentage of female students was probably 8 to 10%. And all those years, 25 years fast forward, and at University of Plymouth Mechanical Engineering, we're still 10%. Overall engineering students are about 15%. So as a sector, we are still struggling with making it more attractive to female engineering students. So that was sort of like, that really kind of like surprised me. At the same time, it didn't surprise me, because as a female engineer, I kind of, have gone through some of those challenges myself. But I felt it was such a privilege to be in a position where we can then help the next generation. So I then became the associate head for teaching and learning, and in that role, we looked at when the Royal Academy of Engineering's Diversity Impact program came, we were very excited, because that is the first time where we actually felt that the academy is doing something to actually practically improve diversity. So we looked at the data at University of Plymouth, and we looked at all the diversity groups that we have within the university in engineering. And it was interesting, Faiza, you saying the 27% of Newcastle University students associate to be neurodivergent and are disabled, which is way above the national average. National average is about 14%. University of Plymouth average is about 18%. And our school, which is a School of Engineering, Computing and Mathematics, we had, at the time when we put the application 2 years ago, our data suggested that 22% of our students were either neurodivergent or disabled or both. And so it just made logical sense for us to kind of, understand what that means, what the experiences of those students are, and how we can make it better. And hence the journey with this project started, which has now only just ended last week.
Wow, that's incredible. And yeah, I think, especially I think after COVID, not necessarily like people developed it, but talked about it a lot more, like the idea of neurodiversity, because a lot of people definitely struggled with online learning, for example. Some people couldn't handle that kind of space. So from my experience, I was in school when COVID was happening. I was in my A-level years. And so our school ended up making it like an extra sort of open space that was safe, and people would be isolated and stuff for people with neurodiversity who felt they couldn't concentrate. So it was very based on ADHD, maybe, for them to go in and still be able to learn properly, just because they could not concentrate in their own houses. And I think that was a very interesting thing, that we found that it kind of impacted people's ADHD for one, being at home all of the time because of COVID.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think COVID has made things worse, because after COVID, when we restarted, we started with a hybrid delivery. And what we felt that the hybrid delivery actually wasn't working for our students, because the confidence of coming into a lecture theatre had already kind of like, disappeared for some students. And then to give them the option of actually attending a lecture from the home was actually making it worse. So when we had that conversation with the students, they felt that, I mean, it's a difficult area, because when we talk to the students, some students do prefer hybrid, especially, if you have a physical disability, it helps that you have kind of live streaming. But it can also make some of those, especially on the neurodivergent spectrum, it can make those challenges worse, because you're giving them a reason to not come in. And for them, it's part of their personal journey to sort of like, overcome those challenges to come in and work within, within a group setting or in a large classroom. However, as part of the project, with some of the stuff that we did with our students, we looked at different ways in terms of how we can make the classroom more inclusive. And I think that is what the kind of aim needs to be, because those are social skills that, from overwhelmingly from the students that we spoke to that took part in our project, felt that it was useful for them to come in the lecture room, but they also felt it was useful to have recordings of the content. So we have now made it, in a way, compulsory, that most of our lectures now are, pre-recorded. And so the recording or live recorded, and then recording is then made available after the actual live session. So that recording is there for the students to kind of go back, consolidate their learning, or for whatever reason they were not able to attend, then they can actually see the lecture recording.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that kind of covers almost as much as you can cover, because you've got that, well, they have to come in first, and then if they didn't, then they can see a recording. I know our university does that too, and it does seem to work very well. And we do have, I think, more attendance than we would have otherwise. All right, well, we're going to start talking about, I'm going to throw some quotes at you that we've got from some of our underrepresented engineering students. And so the first kind of topic is on a barrier to education. And so the first quote reads, I have neurodiversity, which I feel has acted as a barrier in my education and is underrepresented at Newcastle University. Although there is support available for this, I feel it is not widely understood or supported in the university community. And then the next one says, I am neurodivergent, which makes it somewhat difficult to engage with others. On the one hand, I excel in areas I hold great interest in, but on the other hand, I struggle with the physical environment in lectures and labs and have issues communicating in a way that is not misunderstood by others. So yeah, got to kind of not necessarily different points of views, but like the first one is definitely talking about how it's underrepresented and they don't feel there is much support in our university. So that's quite interesting to hear, I think, that they feel it's not supported enough.
Yeah, no, I mean, both of those quotes resonate very much with all the students that we have worked with as well. And some of as a result of the work that we have done, we developed this toolkit. And the idea of the toolkit was to kind of give, the aim of the toolkit was twofold. The first half was about career development and development of skills like, confidence building, leadership, public speaking, that sort of thing. So we did a series of webcasts on topics that some of the students who are on the neurodivergent spectrum, they sort of said to us, these are the areas that we struggle with. Like one of the second quotation that you actually said that, struggle in big spaces with lots of people around, having lots of noise. So we kind of work with Central University Services to say, well, when we run careers fair, when we have the project showcase day, which is a big thing for the engineering projects, can we have a quiet space for students to kind of go in so they can actually, go and see employers in that quiet space, or they just have that time out, so they have got that quiet space to go in. So these are like very small adaptations that have come as a result of directly talking to our students. And then the second aim of the toolkit was to, for teaching staff, is how we can make our spaces more inclusive. And this is about lighting. So a lot of rooms in University of Plymouth, we have like downlights. And some of those downlights can be actually quite distracting for some of the students. So how we manage those downlights or keep the room not too dark, but not too bright as well. How the desks and the chairs are laid out in the room to make it more welcoming and more sort of inclusive, and how we facilitate the sort of onboarding, because that was something which was also pointed out, especially pre-induction, that when students are coming in, that's the most a difficult time for them, very challenging, because they don't know their environment. It's a new environment. So how we can kind of prepare them for that induction and the sort of like onboarding coming into a new university environment. So all of those kind of tips we have put together into this neurodiversity toolkit. We are, as an institution, we are taking it very seriously, and as a school, we are taking it very seriously. So we ran, as part of the project, we ran an inclusive cultures workshop for our members of staff, and that was attended by about 70 members of staff, so it was very well attended. And the purpose of that, the training was delivered by Equal Engineers, who have been partners on this project. And the purpose of that was very much about raising the understanding of how to teach, how to make sure that your classroom is inclusive for neurodivergent students. And there was, lots of tips that were given in that training session. And what was interesting is when we evaluated the session, overwhelmingly the staff found it very useful. But what they pointed out is, what about staff? What about staff who are neurodivergent? How is the university and the school supporting them? And I think that led to the next training event that we then did in April this year, which was very much about cultures, like a theatre workshop, where we did some scenarios. We played out some scenarios of certain behaviors, and then tried to kind of challenge those behaviors. So it is part of a journey. It is, first of all, it is an understanding of how we can make our spaces more inclusive, and then it is about understanding the whole kind of student journey, from an early disclosure at the time they become our applicant, to overholders. Soon as that is confirmed, then there is that online form filling and all of that, and what kind of information we want from there, so it is on the system, and how we can then help the students through that journey. And I think one of the other things that we have also made an adjustment to is some of the students who have some reasonable adjustment that they would request, and traditionally the university would ask for evidence for it. But because of the sort of backlog in the NHS, and some students who find it quite late if they have filled an online questionnaire and a certain score indicate that they could be on that spectrum, our diagnosis couldn't come for another 3 years, and their time with the university would sort of come to an end. So we now encourage that self disclosure, and through that the umbrella disability services that sort of work and operate with students to find that support, and to make those adjustments as and when they're needed in that kind of student journey. So we encourage students to go and do that early disclosure, so the disability team are aware of what that is, and then those appropriate things can be put in place. I think we still have a lot of challenges, and some challenges are around the GDPR issue and what the lecturer can and cannot know about the student. And obviously the student themselves may decide they don't want to do an early disclosure. So there are those challenges about not knowing, but then there are also challenges about just making sure that we are doing the right thing. And it is all about learning, and I think we are more informed, and we are in a better place than we were 2 years ago. We have done a lot of activities with our students and with the staff. The students have directly benefited. To give you an example, one of the activities that we had on the project was micro internships. So we developed micro internships with local companies over the 2 years, and the students were paid for from the project and the company. So it was like a 3-way contract. But when we were talking to companies and we said that the students that we would put forward for the micro internships are students who are neurodivergent and or disabled, there was a lot of nervousness from the companies, even though in a way it was a very low risk to the company because it was a 3-way relationship. But the point we were trying to make is your recruitment process is actually, because a lot of them are now relying on AI as well for the recruitment process, a lot of students who are on the spectrum, you are missing out on that talent. And so part of the struggle was to convince the companies to come and to give that opportunity. But the first year, it worked so well, the companies that did come on board, that we expanded it to more companies in the following year. And a couple of companies have now continued to offer that micro internship, even though the project has officially ended. So there is no payment associated now. So there is a 1-week voluntary micro internship that the University Career Services has embedded as part of the APP agenda, which is the Access and Participation Plan. And we are now offering it as a standard university offering for a 1-week micro internship. And the way we're doing it is it's prioritized to the neurodivergent and disabled student body, and then it sort of goes down the list of the minority groups. So again, that is a success that sort of came out directly from this project. I'm very pleased with that.
I think it's again, like from that first quote, the fact that it's not widely understood. I think what you've done, even just like the fact you guys have had meetings that people have been able to share their experiences with, is like the start of being more understood and actually understanding what neurodiversity is and how it affects people. So I think that's one of the really important things, to actually get like, people in to talk about how they feel and what is affecting them. Like I didn't even consider the idea of like lights being an effect to people, but obviously that's something that you guys have found out and have like tried to combat, and that's like such an amazing revelation almost that would definitely be helping a lot of people. I know one of my friends, obviously to keep things anonymous, I won't say their name, but had mentioned the fact that a couple of like internships do certain, kind of like what you were talking about, do certain tests that don't feel accessible for neurodivergent people. And so this person is dyslexic. And they were saying the test that they had to do for one of their internship applications was very like nonverbal verbal reasoning based, which they really struggle with. And so they were saying that this doesn't feel necessarily inclusive to someone like me who has dyslexia. And I think that's something that, again, maybe in the future, or what we should start doing is developing things that could maybe be more inclusive for them, because obviously internships are a big thing for anyone. But the fact that you guys are offering a micro internship is also like amazing that they can have that and that it's more tailored to them, because obviously from my friends' experience at least, it's harder for them to get like internships when they have tests to do.
Yes, yes, and I think it was very well received with the students that were on, that took part during the project. One of the students in the subsequent year was offered a place in that company as a direct result of the micro internship. So I think there was a success story. As the micro internships are embedded, we have now heard stories from students who went through the company's placement opportunities, but did not get through because that's also a very long process, but then came across the micro internships, and in the same company, they have got the micro internship now, so they would be working over the summer. So again, that is an opportunity for the company to meet the student direct and have that sort of, personal relationship, which may or may not, result in something more permanent for the student once they graduate. But it is about creating those opportunities. So we do a lot of things. I mean, not because of this project. We had a mentoring scheme with some of the local companies for our first year students anyway. And I think what this project did is sort of like, build on that industrial relationship that we have, but also sort of highlight the challenges that some of the minority groups, do have. Because one of the other things that was very much highlighted as a result of this project is intersectionality, which is something that we weren't really able to properly explore, because somebody who is neurodivergent could have so many other minority characteristics, and then as a result of that, they can be even more not be included in many things because of those challenges that the intersectionality sort of brings onto them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on this podcast as well, we've deal with a lot of intersectionality and sort of the fact that a lot of people have to deal with not just one issue but multiple, and at times they're not sure which one is causing them to be maybe biased against or something, because there's a couple of times where people, well, myself included, can be like, is it because I'm a woman, is it because I'm a person of color? Like, you never know why you're being judged for certain reasons. But I think that always does come up, but it is very difficult to kind of see which problem is causing what. Um, so we're going to move on to some more neurodiversity experiences. Starting off with a quote that was, "Teaching staff should do better, however, well-being services are brilliant," which I think is a positive sort of message, that our well-being service is, sort of helping in the way it should. But I think sometimes it's like they forget that teaching staff and the people in the lectures should also have the kind of training that would go about being able to help people with neurodiversity.
That quote again resonates very much with what our students said, and it was as a direct result of that. I mean, some of the things that were brought to our attention is, for example, not having the lecture slides too cluttered, putting the lecture slides in advance so they can, they know what would be taught, and that sort of like get rid of some of the anxiety coming into the classroom. We have 2-hour lectures timetabled, or 2-hour sessions, I should say, timetabled as a standard at University of Plymouth. So is to have regular breaks, or at least have a break after 50 minutes. And you think, surely that should be common sense. But it was brought to our attention through the focus groups that we did with our students that clearly not everybody would follow that. So yes, I mean, I think that is a very important point. And it was because as a direct result of that we did staff trainings So we've run 2 staff trainings as part of the project because we want to raise that awareness, and we want to kind of raise that understanding in staff that because the student body is so diverse now that you're teaching, if you can make your spaces and your lecture notes inclusive, it is about making small changes, but those small changes can have a massive impact on the learning experience of somebody who is not neurotypical. So.
I completely agree. I think a couple of our lecturers will kind of go through make like slide packs that are specifically for people who find it hard to read that kind of bulky information and make it so it's a lot more spread out and easy for them to read. And of course, that is a bit more effort, but I think it is, as you said, so worth it for someone's education that it's definitely, I know a lot of people are very grateful when they do that. All right, the next 2 quotes, I'll read them together. So the first one is, I have had issues due to my neurodiversity when working in groups. These have not been handled all that well by teaching staff, which is disappointing and has caused me a lot of distress. And then the next one says, I don't feel that the education system, including the engineering degree at Newcastle, is built with neurodivergent people in mind. I still meet with a lot of resistance and lack of understanding from teaching staff at times due to my neurodiversity traits. I have, however, a very positive experience with the Wellbeing and Disability Service at Newcastle University. Actually, I'll read the third one too, because again, it's very similar. The Wellbeing Disability staff I have encountered here are brilliant. They are so patient and understanding and seem to genuinely want to support the students. It sounds like a small thing, but I just appreciate being believed regarding my experiences more than anything. I think it's really lovely to see that our Wellbeing and Disability Service is having such a positive impact. But again, I think it is that the fact that staff are not necessarily understanding people's neurodivergency, and especially when it can affect people's behavior. I think that is one of the hardest things to sort of tackle.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and it is. I think it is something that we also found that the disability team is just brilliant. The staff know exactly what they're doing, and those processes are working. But where there has been some challenges are having that understanding with the teaching staff. I think if I address the group work first, I think group work is a difficult one because Engineering Council stipulates an element of group work. So we would want bits of group work within the sort of like degree program and for students to demonstrate those skills, but they can be done in different ways. And I think that's really where that understanding of the need of the student comes into, like what is the sort of like anxiety levels for the student and how we can then adapt, have the assessment be more inclusive in a way that we are assessing the learning outcome as required by the degree. At the same time, we are not disadvantaging the student. And I think that's it's obviously this is very kind of very specific to your program, to your university. I mean, not the group work, but the challenges can be because every university has got its own sort of ways of dealing with certain things. I mean, here at Plymouth, we encourage every student to be part of a group, but in very extreme cases where we think that with the anxiety levels for the student, then the same group work could be assigned as a single piece of work for that student. But they are very kind of rare cases, and that's really where we work with the central team to understand what is the need for the student and where are those anxiety level coming from. Because as you know, when you kind of go and work in an engineering environment, you will be working in a team. So it is to develop those skills and how you work with it. But I still feel it is about informing staff, and that's like teaching staff. And part of the purpose of the toolkit was to kind of just talk about those tips, if you like, how we can be more sort of sensitive to the diverse student needs and making those small changes to our assessment to make the assessment more inclusive and to make the learning environment more inclusive, taking into account the different sort of needs of the student body. And I think the other point that you made is that engineering degree in Newcastle is not built with neurodivergent students in mind. I think it's not. Engineering degrees are not built with neurodivergent students, full stop. And yet data is suggesting that there is a higher percentage of students or, pupils and professional people who are within the engineering profession who are identifying as a neurodivergent. I think from working on this project, I hope that there is more awareness now. More people are kind of coming forward, and more people are more comfortable talking about it. I mean, as an example, we had a conversation. So I went to an event at the Dyson Institute recently, which was very much talking about neurodiversity and see if we can come up with some kind of a framework for the teaching staff. And what is interesting is at some of the institutions, like the more kind of research intensive institutions, there has been a way of thinking that perhaps we don't have neurodivergent students because of the tariff of students that they attract. And it's a myth, because that's not true. They also have neurodivergent students, and we also they're everywhere. It's not as if that only certain universities have them. It is about raising that awareness, and from that point, once we can be at a place where we have raised awareness, then hopefully we will start to think on if each one of us can kind of start how we can make those small changes and adjustments, then hopefully it would be a better experience for all students, and especially neurodivergent students.
Absolutely, I completely agree. So the next topic, or the next slide we're going to go through, is talking about ableist attitudes in engineering. So we've got two quotes here. The first one says, "Ableism is very prevalent in engineering. I've regularly heard about people within engineering talk about disabilities in a negative manner and use various disabilities as a way to mock each other as a joke." And then the second one reads, "The people on my course are ableist whether they would see themselves that way or not. They say ableist slurs, talk about disabilities in a derogatory way, definitely not treated very kindly or with any understanding." I think
that's a shame, really, to be able to kind of hear that, and for students to actually experience that and say that. But I mean, from my experience of working with the project and with the whole project team that supported us during this whole process, it is really about raising awareness. I think that is really the only way we can challenge certain behaviors. One of the things that we covered in one of the staff trainings was the role of a bystander. And I think it was quite eye-opening that in many cases, a sort of bystander is one who's not doing anything, but is kind of listening to certain things, but does not have the courage to actually call it out. And I think that's really what the training kind of challenged and raised awareness, is how we can call these things out. Because the more, I think the more the awareness is raised, and the more it is sort of normalized, that yes, you have people with varying and differing abilities, and making sure that really it is our job to make sure that the environment that they're coming in is inclusive. Then hopefully we can minimize those sort of like experiences. But no, apart from that, no, I'm just very sorry to kind of hear that, really.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think part of it is just like the almost lack of education people have in terms of neurodiversity and this sort of disability. I know something that is a very common like myth almost is people think that people with disabilities shouldn't be in the field because they like might not be able to handle it, or like it might be too dangerous for them, which again I think that's just, it comes down to people not having the correct knowledge of what this disability is, what neurodivergency is, and how it actually can affect someone, and how it can also just not be an issue at all. Like, I think people have some misinformation about what neurodiversity is a lot of the time, and that causes them to like believe that it's like something like engineering. They'll say that it's not like a place for someone with neurodiversity when it's absolutely fine. And on the other hand, I think, and I've seen this happen to a couple of people, they're very afraid of mentioning their neurodivergency in fear that it will affect their like job prospects in the future um or their careers when, you know, in actuality there's no way it can. Like I think it is illegal to be biased in that regard.
Yes,
If I'm
it's the
wrong.
Equalities Act. Yes.
Yeah,
And
so
we found that as well, that equality, not many people are aware of the Equality Act. You can ask for reasonable adjustment.
mhm.
And I mean, for me, it was quite an eye opener, because when we were setting up the interviews for the micro internships, some of our students came to me personally to say, can we ask for reasonable adjustment in the interview? And I wasn't really sure what that meant, because I wasn't fully aware of the whole Equalities Act and what that is. But I took that request to the employers and said, that's a request coming in. You know, and then we had that sort of like conversation with the employer, and we then did put those reasonable adjustments that were kind of requested. But if you don't ask, you know, and it is illegal. That's right. It is under the law. You're sort of covered to raise that. Yeah.
But I think that's something that again should be more. I think some people don't either realize that or don't like haven't been told it. And so I think it ends up with a lot of people end up like sort of shying away from saying that they have neurodiversity or going to seek the help that they would need or would benefit from for their neurodiversity because they're so afraid of this idea that they might get like some bias on them because of it. When again, in actuality, that's not legal. It wouldn't happen at all. And so I think if everyone knew that, then some people would may feel more comfortable going and saying like, oh, I might have this, I might have that. Could I get some help?
Yeah, no, definitely. Definitely. I agree with that.
All right. The next thing is these, well, three quotes, I'd say, on what change people would like to see, in terms of maybe our campus, university in general. Um, The first one reads, I wish I was in an environment where clear communication was more common. From an autistic standpoint, this would be very helpful. And in turn, I would like more tolerance for neurodivergence and disabilities in general. The next one reads, I wish for dyslexia to become, to be made more aware and of and incorporated by students and staff. Although I do have an SSP, which is a student service plan, or forgot what the name is, but it's like a plan for students to help with their disabilities or neurodiversity. I do feel this can be sometimes overlooked. And the last one just says, I would love to see more celebration of neurodiversity on campus, which, yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's something that shouldn't be shied away from talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I again, all three quotes resonate very highly with when we spoke to our students as well. If I take it backwards, then there was a talk about having a neurodiversity network, and again, that would be a celebration, and a safe space for neurodivergent people to kind of go and connect with, and that is something that we in our university are kind of looking at ways of how we can facilitate that. So that was something that came directly as a result by talking to the students. One of the other things that also we did as part of the project was we organized guest lectures. And one of the criteria for choosing the guest lectures were people who have a career in industry and are identified themselves either to be neurodivergent and or disabled and are comfortable to talk from that space. So that was the criteria that we did to choose our guest lectures. And what we found is those guest lecture sessions were very powerful in actually empowering the students who were kind of, because the guest lectures were delivered to everybody. But specifically, the students who identified to be neurodivergent came and spoke to us afterwards and said, it was so nice to be able to hear from somebody who's working in industry, who has gone through the same challenges as, say, what I'm going through, and to think that that hasn't really impaired them in any way in terms of their sort of successes and their achievements. So I mean, they've had some challenges, and because they've had those challenges, they're making it easier for others, at least within their own company setting. And I think to kind of have that representation, it's what they say is representation matters. And that's what we felt, that the guest lectures made that representation very visible, to have that role models for the students who are neurodivergent, to see actually such and such, like there was one particular guest lecturer who spoke about their personal experience of asking for, because they were working in an open plan office where there is a lot of noise and they couldn't focus on certain tasks. So they just asked for noise cancellation headphones. It's a very small adjustment. And that meant that that member of staff was more productive. And in one company that they worked, it was sort of like given to them, but with a bit like, well, why do you really need them? And then there were comments made kind of, oh, are you listening to music? Or what music are you listening to? By colleagues, not really aware that this is a noise cancellation headphone. In another company, because they left that company and, went to another company, and in another company, they, it was a very different environment. It was an environment where by mutual agreement, where when there were days that there was very focused work to be done or a document to be written, the member of staff was allowed to work from home, so the noise wasn't there. And during their normal working days, when they were in an open planned office, if they wanted to have headphones, that's fine. And everyone around was aware. So those kind of jokes about, oh, what music you were listening to or whatever, never really happened, because people understood the place where that was coming from. So again, it kind of goes back to representation and normalizing certain things. And that only comes by raising awareness, having that representation, and people to be comfortable to say, hey, I'm such and such, and yes, I did suffer from, or I have dyslexia, or whatever, and I had these challenges, and this is how sort of like I circumvented and went through. So you can talk about that personal space, which I think can be very powerful.
Yeah, I think for anyone, the idea of role models is so important. And so having someone who has had the same or similar experiences to you and sort of see like if they can do it, then I can do it. It's really powerful.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And then the one about clear communication, I mean, we've had that several times. And I think that is something which is really said in terms of the context of assessments, that if the assessment briefs are clear, then we know what is expected of us. If the mark scheme is clear, then we know how to address the problem. And as a school, we have done a lot of work to try to have some sort of consistency in how the mark scheme is done, and in some sort of consistency in terms of like having moderation processes and scrutiny processes put in place, so the assessment brief is clear. And I think that it is still a journey, and I mean, it's certain things which I think perhaps maybe can still be down to interpretation in terms of it's not clear. But I think that doesn't just benefit autistic students; it benefits everybody, because if it can be spelled out in terms of what I'm expecting of you, then your life is easier. You can go away and work on it. Or if you're not clear on something, you can say, that's what I'm not clear on. But if I kind of give you a very vague thing, just go and look in this kind of general direction, then for some people, they like that kind of creativity. For others, they can be completely lost. So yes, I think it is something that we as academics need to be working on further in terms of how we can make that better and clear.
No,
And the dyslexia, sorry, yeah, go on, carry on with that.
I was agreeing with you.
And the final one was a dyslexia one. And again, that sort of came to us. A lot of our students said because what we did is when we did the toolkit, so when the toolkit became live, we did a focus group and we invited our students to say, well, look, there you go, this is a toolkit, use it, and give us some feedback in terms of how we can make it better. Is it working for you? And the feedback that came back to us was, yes, these bits are really good, but for example, some of the videos that we had put in terms of how to improve certain skill set, they said, oh, they're too long. Could you shorten them like 5 minutes or 10 minutes rather than a half an hour long video? So we improved those. But the other overwhelming thing that came is, could you put some tools, could you put information on dyslexia? Because we hadn't specifically put information on any of the kind of neurodivergent characteristics or spectrum, that people can have. So they specifically asked us to put some self-screen links to some self-screening tools and links and some sort of like information on dyslexia. So we did try to incorporate that as much as possible. And I think that kind of goes back to raising that awareness of dyslexia. I mean, I think that is perhaps in a way the most common one, but still for a neurotypical person to understand how a dyslexic person would say certain things is still quite challenging. And again, I'll just kind of finish this off by my recent visit to the Dyson Institute, where they had done some simulation tools that they have developed. And in terms of that simulation tools, they actually simulated certain text. Is when you have certain text on a PowerPoint or something, and they then projected it, is how a dyslexic person would see that text, and how the letters were kind of disappearing and reappearing. And I think it was so visual that it makes you kind of very aware of, like, oh my God, the text that a neurotypical person can read so easily, if it is written in a certain way, then a dyslexic person, because the letters are jumping all over the place, it will make it so much more challenging for them to actually understand what is written in there. And I think that made it quite visual. So it was quite a quite a good tool to have that impact for those if you want to kind of raise awareness, or you're not aware of what is dyslexia.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're on the last slide, which is what can be done, which I think we've actually covered a lot during this podcast as a whole. But I think one of the things that was mentioned was the SSP, which I've now remembered is Student Support Plan. But I think they are super helpful for anyone that, has a disability to try and, or neurodiversity to try and implement. The only thing is, and we sort of touched on this before, is the idea that getting diagnosed is actually quite a long process, especially now with like a sort of backlog in the NHS, and so people find it very difficult to get the proper what they feel is the proof that they need to get things like student support plans. But the thing is, they're actually very accessible to anyone anyway. So, like, what I would say to anyone is go and try and get a student support plan, go to the wellbeing services anyway and talk to them, because more likely than not, they will provide you with a student support plan, because they also understand that there is a massive backlog in terms of getting proper diagnosis and stuff.
Definitely, definitely. And I think it is about early disclosure. I mean, I think that came up so much in our conversations with students, that if there is a better way of having that early disclosure, because then that plan is put in place, and that plan will continue for them through their life of while they are at, with our university or your university.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I wanted to say was the idea of, what we've been saying, like educating staff and students alike about neurodiversity itself. I think something that I remember resonated with me when I was in school was one of my friends who was neurodivergent and had some issues with loud noises, would wear their headphones in certain classes and would be met with, like, not in a very unkind tone, sort of scrutinized, like, why are you listening to music during my class or something like that, and they'd have to sort of explain that it's not music, they've just got it in to block out some of the noise and such. And it was something that they'd already established with, for example, like a couple of teachers in well-being, but because that information hadn't been passed down to, say, each teacher, they'd repeatedly have to explain themselves, which is also a very uncomfortable position to be in when you're surrounded by all of these people. So I think that's one of the aspects that could definitely be improved, of people or staff members, especially being more considerate and, educated in terms of, like, people might wear headphones if they have, or noise canceling headphones if they have issues with loud noises, or some people might need to leave the room, like, at a random moment just to get some fresh air, or get like to a safe space, a quiet space. And that shouldn't be something that they're judged for, or like publicly ridiculed for, or anything.
Yeah, agree.
And I think the idea of having safe space is also really, really good. I'm not entirely sure if Newcastle University has implemented that. I don't think we have a specific space, for example, in the engineering building that I stay in, but I think it'd be really nice to implement somewhere that's sort of a retreat, a quiet area for people who need that a moment, can just go and sit and sort of relax.
Yeah, I mean, I think the universities are looking into, their kind of infrastructure, and see how those safe spaces can be made more, students can be made more aware that these are places that you can book, or you can go to, or are always available, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's all we've got for today. Thank you so much, Asia, for joining me today with this podcast, and I hope you've all enjoyed listening to it and watching it as well.
But thank you for having me.
All right, well, I'll see you all next time for another podcast. Bye.